The moment I plugged in that old laptop, my whole body went cold. Not the kind of cold you get from air conditioning or stepping outside in January, the kind that starts in your chest and spreads outward until your fingertips go numb and your brain starts refusing to process what your eyes are seeing. I need to back up, because none of this makes sense without the beginning, and the beginning started with a moving box. My husband and I had been planning to relocate from Portland to Sacramento for almost 6 months. His company was transferring him, better salary, better position, the whole package. I'd already given notice at my job at the physical therapy clinic, where I'd worked for 4 years. We'd sold most of our furniture. The house was half empty, boxes stacked against walls, masking tape and Sharpie labels on everything. It was that in-between state, where nothing feels real yet, where your life is literally packed up around you and you're just waiting to exhale. He had been traveling more than usual, flying back and forth to Sacramento for onboarding meetings, apartment scouting, all of it. So most of the packing had fallen to me. I didn't mind. I'm the kind of person who actually likes organizing. Color-coded labels, categorized boxes. It's almost meditative for me. The storage room under our staircase was the last place I tackled. We'd been in that house for 3 years, and that little closet had become the graveyard of things we didn't know what to do with. Old cables, a broken humidifier, a box of my wedding cards I kept meaning to organize into an album. And on the very back shelf, tucked behind a set of luggage we hadn't touched since our honeymoon, I found a laptop I didn't recognize. It wasn't mine. My laptop was a silver MacBook Air sitting open on the kitchen counter. This one was a black ThinkPad, older, with a small sticker of a mountain range on the bottom left corner of the lid. I turned it over in my hands. There was a small piece of electrical tape over the webcam. I almost put it back. I almost convinced myself it was something from before we got married, something he'd forgotten about. People have old laptops. It's not a crime. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the webcam tape. Maybe it was the fact that in 3 years of living together, he had never once mentioned owning a second laptop. Maybe it was the way it had been tucked back there, not just stored but hidden, behind the luggage, behind a box of old manuals, against the wall. I carried it to the kitchen table and opened it. It asked for a password. I sat there for a moment, chewing the inside of my cheek. Then I tried the password he used for most things. Our anniversary date backward with an exclamation point. The one I'd seen him type 100 times. It didn't work. I tried his mother's birthday, his childhood dog's name, the name of the street he grew up on. Nothing. Then I tried something I'd seen him punch into his gym locker once, years ago, something random and specific that I'd only noticed because I thought it was unusual. A 6-digit number that didn't correspond to any date I knew. The screen unlocked. I don't know how long I sat there before I actually started looking through it. It could have been 30 seconds. It could have been 5 minutes. The refrigerator hummed. The neighbor's dog barked twice outside. Everything felt very ordinary and very wrong at the same time. The desktop was mostly clean. A few folders, a browser shortcut, and one folder sitting in the center of the screen, labeled simply with my name, my first name, just my first name. In plain text, no decoration, Zoe. I opened it. The first thing I saw was a photograph of me sleeping. I was on my side, our gray duvet pulled up to my shoulder, one arm tucked under the pillow the way I always sleep. The angle was from above and to the right, from the direction of the bookshelf in our bedroom. My stomach dropped so fast I had to grab the edge of the table. I scrolled. There were hundreds of photos, me in the kitchen, me on the phone in the living room, me getting dressed, me crying on the couch one night last October when I thought I was alone, me talking to my sister on FaceTime, me reading, me doing yoga in the spare room, me arguing on the phone with the insurance company about a billing error, pacing back and forth completely unaware. There was a subfolder labeled audio. I clicked it without thinking. The files were named by date. I opened one from 3 months ago, and my own voice came out of the laptop speakers, talking to my best friend about feeling disconnected lately, about how I wasn't sure he and I were in the same place anymore emotionally, about how I was scared that moving to Sacramento might not fix anything between us. I had been having that conversation in our bedroom with the door closed. I had believed I was completely alone. I shut the laptop. I sat in my kitchen with my hands flat on the table and just breathed for a while. He had installed cameras in our home. He had been recording me. For what looked like at least 2 years, based on the file timestamps, he had been documenting my private life in my own house. My own bedroom, my own bathroom. I saw the folder labeled bath and I didn't open it. I couldn't. I kept thinking about the word surveillance. It kept surfacing in my mind like something floating up from dark water. This wasn't a worried husband checking in. This wasn't a security system for burglars. This was methodical, organized, labeled. The folder with my name at the center of his desktop. I thought about how he'd suggested I quit my job 3 months before the move. Said it would make the transition easier, that I could take a break before finding something in Sacramento. I thought it was sweet. I thought he was trying to take care of me. I had agreed without really questioning it. Now I was unemployed, in a half-empty house, about to relocate to a city where I knew no one, completely financially dependent on a man who had apparently been surveilling me for years. I opened the laptop again. I needed to understand the scope of what I was looking at before I did anything else. I needed information, and I needed to stay calm, which was taking everything I had. There was a second folder I'd initially skipped over. It was labeled legal. I almost didn't open it because part of me was terrified of what more there could possibly be, but I opened it. Inside were documents. A life insurance policy on me, which I knew existed. We'd taken it out together. But there was an amendment dated 8 months ago that I had not signed. Or rather, someone had signed it with my name in handwriting that looked almost like mine but wasn't. The beneficiary had been changed. Not to charity. Not to a family member. To an LLC I'd never heard of. There was a second document, a psychological evaluation form, partially filled out with my name on it, describing erratic behavior, emotional instability, and difficulty distinguishing reality. It was from a doctor I had never seen or heard of. There was an email draft, saved but never sent, addressed to my parents. It said that I had been struggling for some time, that he was worried about my mental health, that he wanted them to know what he was dealing with. It was compassionate in tone, heartbroken even, like a husband at the end of his rope. I read it 3 times. He was building a paper trail, not to leave me, not to divorce me, something worse. He was constructing a version of me that existed only in documents, a version that was unstable and erratic, and perhaps not capable of managing her own affairs. I thought about the move, the new city, no job, no friends within 300 miles, an apartment I'd never seen in a place I didn't know, and a husband who had been quietly, carefully, systematically preparing something I still didn't fully understand. My hands were completely steady when I closed the laptop for the second time. The fear had moved through me and come out the other side as something else entirely. Clarity. Not cold fury, not panic. Just an absolute and total understanding that I had one job now, and I needed to do it right. I put the laptop back exactly where I found it. Behind the luggage. Against the wall. Exactly as it had been. Then I went to the kitchen and made a cup of coffee like it was any other Tuesday. He came home that evening carrying Thai takeout and talking about traffic on I-205. He kissed my cheek. He smelled like his usual cologne. He asked how the packing was going, and I told him the storage room was almost done. That night I lay beside him in our bed and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep. I listened to him breathe. I thought about the bookshelf in the corner of our bedroom and I did not look at it. The next morning, as soon as he left for the office, I moved. First I called my sister. She's 4 years older than me, lives in Seattle, works in HR, and is the most pragmatic person I have ever known in my life. I had called her crying dozens of times over the years for smaller things than this. This time I called her with my voice completely even and told her everything in 7 minutes. She was quiet for a long moment. "Do not move to Sacramento," she said. "I know. Don't use your regular email. Don't use your phone if you can avoid it. Get to a public computer or a friend's device." She had clearly already shifted into problem-solving mode, which was exactly what I needed. I drove to the public library. I borrowed a laptop from the digital services desk. I created a new email address from scratch, using a name my second-grade teacher used to call me, something no one would connect to me. I sent my sister the new address. Then I started researching. First, a domestic violence and surveillance attorney. Not just any family law attorney, specifically someone who handled domestic surveillance cases, because what I was looking at on that laptop was a crime. Recording someone in their home without their consent in Oregon is a Class A misdemeanor at minimum and can escalate to felony charges depending on the nature and duration of the recordings. The bathroom footage alone, if it existed the way I suspected, would trigger far more serious charges. I found one. a firm in Portland that specialized in exactly this. I sent an email from my new address explaining the situation in bullet points, concise, factual, no emotion. I had an appointment the next day. Second, I photographed everything on that laptop. Not by opening it at home where I didn't know what monitoring might exist on our Wi-Fi network, but by describing everything I had seen to my sister, who wrote it down. I needed to get the laptop itself to the attorney. That night I made pasta and poured wine and asked my husband about his week. He told me about a difficult client. He complained about his coworker's project management. He looked comfortable, relaxed. He had no idea that anything had changed. The attorney's name was Dorothea. She was in her early 50s, wore no jewelry, and had the particular manner of someone who had heard genuinely terrible things for a long time without losing her ability to respond to them. She listened to me for 45 minutes without interrupting except to ask precise clarifying questions. When I finished, she set down her pen. "I want to be straightforward with you," she said. "What you're describing, if it is what you believe it is, constitutes multiple criminal violations under Oregon revised statutes, as well as potential federal charges under the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, depending on what the audio recordings captured. The forged insurance document is a separate issue entirely. That's fraud." I nodded. "I want you to understand that the most important thing right now is your safety," she said. "Not the case, not the evidence, you." I told her I understood. I also told her that I needed to handle this in a way that made sure it stuck. That he couldn't talk his way out of it, couldn't frame it, couldn't present the version of me in those documents to anyone who mattered before I had the chance to present the truth. She smiled slightly. "Then let's be very careful and very thorough." Over the next 2 weeks, I was the best version of the wife my husband expected me to be. I finished packing the boxes. I made lists for the movers. I sent cheerful texts about Sacramento apartment listings. I went to dinner with his coworkers and smiled at their jokes. At home, I was present and warm and completely unremarkable. And in parallel, invisible to him, everything was moving. Dorothea filed a request for emergency protective action. A forensic digital investigator, someone her firm worked with regularly, was brought in to examine the laptop under proper chain of custody protocols after I provided it through an arrangement that protected the evidence from any claims of tampering. The investigator confirmed what I had found and then some. Cameras had been installed in 6 locations throughout the house. The recordings went back 26 months. The audio files from our bedroom alone numbered in the hundreds. My sister flew down from Seattle without telling him she was coming. She stayed with a friend of hers in Portland, not at our house. We met at the library, at a coffee shop, at a park bench, somewhere different each time. I moved money. Not all of it, nothing dramatic, just the amount from my personal savings account that I had brought into the marriage, transferred quietly to a new account in my name only, at a different bank. Dorothea had advised me this was within my legal rights with respect to separate property. I also opened a new credit card I hadn't had before. His demeanor in those 2 weeks was almost hard to watch. He was warm, attentive, more physically affectionate than he'd been in months. He talked about how excited he was to start fresh in Sacramento, how good it would be for us, how much he felt like we were moving towards something. I smiled and agreed and thought about the audio file of me crying alone in our living room that he had listened to and saved and labeled. The morning it happened, he thought we were going to the new tenant walkthrough for our Portland house. The final step before officially handing over the keys to the renter who'd be moving in after us. He got dressed. He made coffee. He was in a good mood. I had been awake since 4. At 8:15, 3 vehicles pulled up outside. 2 of them were Portland Police Bureau patrol cars. The third was unmarked, driven by a detective I had spoken with twice over the prior 10 days. My husband heard the knock and looked at me. There was a moment, just a fraction of a second, when something moved across his face. Not guilt, exactly. More like calculation, like he was already figuring out the story. Then he looked at me again, and I think he understood that the story had already been written. Just not by him. I opened the door. The detective introduced himself. He said my husband's full name. He said they had a warrant for his arrest and for the search of the premises in connection with unlawful interception of oral communications, invasion of personal privacy, identity fraud, and forgery. My husband didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he turned to me. And his voice, when it came, was very quiet, almost gentle. like he was speaking to someone who had made a mistake. "Sweetheart," he said, "you don't understand what you've done." I stepped aside to let the detective in. "I understand exactly what I've done," I said. I watched them walk him to the patrol car. I stood in the doorway of the house that was no longer mine, surrounded by boxes labeled in my own handwriting, and I felt the most enormous wave of tiredness I have ever experienced in my life. Not defeat, just the weight of 2 weeks of perfect composure, finally lifting all at once. My sister called 30 seconds later. She'd been parked around the corner. She came inside and we sat on the floor of the empty living room, backs against the wall, and she didn't say anything for a while and neither did I. Eventually she said, "What do you need right now?" I thought about it. "Coffee," I said, "and I need to cancel the Sacramento movers." She laughed a real laugh. And then, for the first time in 2 weeks, so did I. The case took 8 months to work through the system. He hired 3 different attorneys. He tried at one point to have the laptop evidence suppressed on the grounds that I had accessed it without permission. A claim that went nowhere given that it was found in our shared marital home in an unsecured storage closet, and the contents constituted ongoing criminal activity. His legal team also tried to introduce the psychological evaluation documents, which backfired badly once the forensic accountant traced the LC on the insurance policy to an account my husband had opened without my knowledge 2 years prior. I won't pretend I came out of it unscathed. There were months that were genuinely dark. I moved into my sister's spare room in Seattle for a while. I started over professionally from scratch, which is harder at 31 than it sounds. I went to therapy, the real kind, twice a week, with a therapist who specialized in coercive control and had clearly seen situations like mine before. But here's what I want to say to anyone who is reading this at 3 in the morning in a quiet house, next to someone they're no longer sure they know. Trust the thing that made you pick up the laptop. Not suspicion, not paranoia, not the urge to go snooping, but that specific, quiet biological alarm in your body that says something is wrong. The one that most of us have been trained our entire lives to dismiss and explain away and apologize for feeling. That alarm is not nothing. I should have trusted mine sooner. I spent a lot of time in that marriage rationalizing things that didn't sit right, explaining away the tension, telling myself I was being too sensitive. And I want to be clear, that is not a character flaw. That is what someone does when they love a person and want to believe the best of them. When they've been carefully, deliberately shaped to doubt themselves. The last time I saw my ex-husband was in a courtroom. He looked older. He didn't look at me directly. His attorney had advised him not to. He pled guilty to 4 of the 7 charges. He is currently serving a sentence that frankly I think is lighter than it should be. But that is a separate conversation for a different day. What I will say is this. I got back to Portland eventually. Not to our old neighborhood, somewhere new. A smaller apartment with big windows and a coffee shop on the ground floor. I have a job I love. I have my sister's number saved as a favorite in my phone, the way it should have always been. I have a therapist I trust. I have a good, loud, complicated life that belongs entirely to me. And I have one rule now, the only one that really matters. When something feels wrong, I don't explain it away anymore. I pay attention. That's it. I just pay attention. And so far that has been enough.